My name is Audrey Mitchell, 34, and I never thought I'd have to choose between my son and my mother. As I sat in the pediatric ICU watching my 7-year-old son Ethan fight for his life after his emergency appendectomy went wrong, my phone buzzed with yet another message from my mother. "You need to be at Madison's party tomorrow. People will talk if you're not there." That was the moment I realized my own mother cared more about appearances than whether her grandson lived or died. If you've ever had to choose between family loyalty and protecting someone you love, I think you'll understand what I went through. I'd love to know where you're watching from and if you've dealt with toxic family members. Hit that like button if you've ever had to stand up to a family member who put their needs above everyone else's, and subscribe to hear more stories about family drama and healing. Now, let me tell you how my world fell apart and then came back together stronger than before. Before everything happened, I had what I thought was a pretty good life. After my divorce from Brian 2 years ago, I had settled into a comfortable routine as a pediatric nurse at Memorial Regional Hospital. The irony of what would happen later isn't lost on me. I spent my days helping other people's children get better, never imagining my own son would be fighting for his life while my family fell apart around me. Ethan was my entire world. At 7 years old, he was this bright, curious little boy who could talk for hours about dinosaurs and space. He knew the names of every prehistoric creature that ever walked the earth and could tell you which ones were carnivores and which were herbivores. On weekends, we had our little traditions. Saturday mornings were for pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, which I'd gotten surprisingly good at making. Then we'd head to the local museum or the park, depending on the weather. Sundays were for movie marathons and building elaborate pillow forts in the living room. It started on a Friday evening. I had picked Ethan up from school, and he mentioned his stomach hurt a little. Nothing alarming, just a casual comment as kids often make. I didn't think much of it at the time. We had pizza for dinner, his favorite, and he seemed fine, if a bit quieter than usual. I remember thinking he might be coming down with something, but he didn't have a fever, so I tucked him into bed with his favorite T-Rex plushie and kissed him goodnight. By Saturday morning, things had changed. Ethan woke up complaining that his stomach hurt worse, and he had a slight fever. As a nurse, I wasn't immediately concerned, but kept a close eye on him. We canceled our plans to visit the Science Museum, and instead, he curled up on the couch watching dinosaur documentaries while I checked his temperature every few hours. The fever hovered around 100 degrees, nothing too concerning yet. But by Saturday evening, I knew something was wrong. His fever had spiked to 103, and he was holding his right side, crying that it hurt too much. The pain had also moved from around his belly button to the lower right side of his abdomen. As a pediatric nurse, alarm bells went off in my head immediately. Classic appendicitis symptoms. I called my ex-husband Brian right away. Despite our divorce, we maintained a good co-parenting relationship. "I'm taking Ethan to the ER," I told him, trying to keep my voice steady as I packed a small bag. "I think it might be his appendix." Brian didn't hesitate. "I'll meet you there," he said, and I felt a wave of gratitude that at least one person in my life was reliable in a crisis. The emergency room was packed that Saturday night, but the triage nurse took one look at Ethan, heard my description of his symptoms, and rushed us back immediately. Being a healthcare worker sometimes has its advantages. The ER doctor examined Ethan, pressing on various parts of his abdomen. When he released pressure on the lower right quadrant, Ethan screamed in pain. Rebound tenderness, another classic sign. They ordered a CT scan to confirm, but the doctor was already certain. "It's appendicitis," he told me grimly. "And from the fever and pain level, I'm concerned it might be close to rupturing. We need to get him into surgery right away." The next hour was a blur of consent forms, pre-op preparations, and trying to comfort Ethan, who was now scared and in excruciating pain. Brian arrived just as they were preparing to take Ethan to the operating room. "Mommy, don't leave me," Ethan cried, clutching my hand as the nurses prepared to wheel him away. "I'll be right here when you wake up, dinosaur boy," I promised, using the nickname he loved. "The doctors are going to fix your tummy, and then you'll feel all better." As they took him away, I felt my composure start to crumble. Brian put his arm around my shoulders and guided me to the waiting room. "He's going to be okay," he reassured me. "Appendectomies are routine procedures." Kids bounce back quickly. While we waited, I called my mother, Judith, to let her know what was happening. I needed my family's support, and despite our complicated relationship, she was still my mother. "Mom, Ethan's in surgery," I said when she answered. "He has appendicitis. We're at Memorial Regional." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh dear," she finally said, her voice lacking the concern I'd hoped for. "Well, it's just appendicitis. They do those surgeries all the time, don't they? He'll be fine." Before I could respond, she continued, "You haven't forgotten about Madison's birthday party tomorrow, have you? It's her 60th, and everyone will be there. The country club is all decorated, and they've hired that band she loves." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, Ethan is in surgery right now. I don't know when he'll be discharged." "But surely you don't need to be there the whole time," she countered. "Brian can stay with him for a few hours while you come to the party." "It would look so bad if you weren't there, Audrey. Madison is my sister, and she specifically asked if you were coming." I ended the call shortly after, telling her I'd update her when Ethan was out of surgery. Brian had heard enough of the conversation to know it hadn't gone well. "Your mom still hasn't changed, has she?" he asked quietly. The surgery was supposed to take about an hour. When 2 hours had passed with no update, I began to worry. Finally, the surgeon appeared, still in his surgical cap and gown. The grave expression on his face made my heart drop. "Ms. Mitchell," he began, and I knew immediately something had gone wrong. There were complications during the surgery. Ethan's appendix had already ruptured by the time we got in there. The infection had spread into his abdominal cavity. My nursing background kicked in, and I understood the severity immediately. Peritonitis. Potentially life-threatening. "We've cleaned out as much of the infection as possible and placed drains," the surgeon continued. "He's on powerful 4 antibiotics, but I need to be honest with you, his condition is critical. The next 24 to 48 hours will be crucial." I felt my legs give out, and Brian caught me before I hit the floor. The surgeon continued explaining the treatment plan, but his words became a distant buzz in my ears. My son, my bright, dinosaur-loving little boy, was fighting for his life because of a routine condition that had turned catastrophic. They took us to the pediatric ICU, where Ethan had been transferred. He looked so small and fragile in the hospital bed, hooked up to monitors, IVs, and with drainage tubes coming from his abdomen. His face was pale, and he was still unconscious from the anesthesia. A nurse explained that they were keeping him sedated to help his body fight the infection. I sat beside his bed, holding his small hand in mine, while Brian spoke with the doctors about the next steps. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my pocket, but I ignored it. Nothing mattered except Ethan. When I finally checked my phone hours later, I had multiple texts from my mother. "Let me know when Ethan's out of surgery. Is he in a regular room now? What time will they discharge him tomorrow? Remember, Madison's party starts at 2. Wear the blue dress I bought you for Christmas. It photographs well. Audrey, why aren't you answering? I need to know if you're coming to the party." The last message was what broke me. "You need to be at Madison's party tomorrow. People will talk if you're not there." Not a single question about how serious Ethan's condition was. Not one offer to come to the hospital or to help in any way. Just concern about appearances and a birthday party while my son fought for his life in the ICU. I threw my phone across the room, where it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. Brian picked it up, glanced at the messages, and then looked at me with sympathy in his eyes. "I'll stay here tonight," he said gently. "You should try to get some rest in the waiting room." But I couldn't leave Ethan's side. As the night wore on, his condition remained unstable. His fever spiked dangerously high several times, and the nurses came in frequently to adjust his medications and check his vital signs. I sat there holding his hand, whispering stories about brave dinosaurs who fought off terrible diseases, hoping somehow he could hear me. As I watched Ethan's chest rise and fall with each breath, my mind drifted back to my own childhood, and I began to understand that my mother's reaction shouldn't have surprised me at all. This was just the latest in a lifelong pattern of emotional neglect that had defined our relationship. I grew up in Westport, Connecticut, in a sprawling colonial house with a perfect lawn and a prestigious address. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect family. My father was a successful corporate attorney, my mother was on every important committee and charity board in town, and my sister Karen and I were expected to maintain the image of perfect daughters. The Mitchell family name meant something in our social circle, and my mother Judith never let us forget it. What people didn't see were the tears I cried alone in my room when I brought home an A- instead of an A and was told I was letting the family down. They didn't see how my mother inspected my outfit before every school event, sometimes making me change 3 or 4 times until I looked appropriate. They didn't hear her criticize my weight, my posture, my choice of friends, all under the guise of helping me succeed. "Appearances matter more than anything, Audrey," she would say. "People judge our entire family by how you present yourself." My sister Karen, 2 years older than me, had learned early on to play by Mom's rules. She joined the right clubs, made friends with the right people, dated boys from the right families. She became my mother's mini-me, and they bonded over their shared value of status and image. I was the family disappointment. I was quieter, more bookish, and I questioned things. When I decided to become a nurse instead of going to law school like my father wanted, my mother acted as if I had announced I was joining a cult. "A nurse," she had said incredulously. "But you were accepted to Yale Law. What will I tell everyone at the club?" The final straw for her was when I fell in love with Brian Turner during my nursing school rotation at Hartford Hospital. Brian was a high school science teacher from a middle-class family in Manchester. He was kind, funny, and passionate about education. He made me feel valued for who I was, not for how I could enhance the family image. When I brought him home to meet my parents, my mother could barely conceal her disdain. "He's a teacher?" she had whispered to me in the kitchen. "Couldn't you at least find a doctor if you insisted on this nursing phase?" Despite her disapproval, Brian and I got married in a simple ceremony at a local botanical garden rather than the country club wedding my mother had always envisioned for me. Karen served as my maid of honor, but spent most of the reception apologizing to family friends for the casual nature of the event, echoing my mother's sentiments. When Ethan was born, I thought things might change. For a brief time, they did. Judith seemed genuinely smitten with her grandson and doted on him during his infancy. She bought him expensive clothes and toys, showed his pictures to everyone at her social functions, and seemed to finally approve of something in my life. But as Ethan grew from a baby into a little boy with his own personality, my mother's interest waned. She complained that he was too active when he ran around her house. She frowned when he talked enthusiastically about dinosaurs instead of the sailing or golf that the right sort of young boys in our town were interested in. When he was diagnosed with mild ADHD at age 5, she told me it was because I was too permissive with him. "You need to enroll him in the right activities, Audrey," she had advised. "The Montgomery boy plays tennis and is learning French already. What will Ethan have to show on his college applications?" "He's 5, Mom," I had responded, exhausted by her constant criticism. "He doesn't need to worry about college applications." "That attitude is exactly why he's falling behind," she had sniffed. Every attempt I made to set boundaries with my mother over the years resulted in family drama. She would call Karen to complain about how disrespectful I was being. She would mention to my father's relatives how worried she was about me and Ethan. She would tearfully tell her friends that she just didn't understand where she had gone wrong with me. The pressure would build until eventually I would give in just to restore peace. My Aunt Madison was another complicating factor in our family dynamics. My mother's older sister, Madison, had never married and had built a successful investment firm in Boston. She was just as status-conscious as my mother but had the financial independence to back it up. After my father left my mother for his younger secretary when I was in college, Madison had stepped in to financially support my mother and maintain her lifestyle. This created an unhealthy power dynamic where Madison's opinions ruled our family. Her birthday celebrations were treated like royal events, with everyone expected to drop everything and attend. She took great pleasure in using her wealth to control family members, often threatening to change her will if people displease her. My mother, financially dependent on Madison's generosity, became even more insistent on maintaining the perfect family image to keep her sister happy. When Brian and I divorced 2 years ago after growing apart, my mother was more concerned about how it would look to her friends than how I was coping emotionally. "Couldn't you have just stayed together until Ethan goes to college?" she had asked. The Williamsons' daughter did that. No one even knew they were unhappy. "I don't want to teach Ethan that it's okay to live a lie, Mom," I had tried to explain. She had sighed dramatically. "Well, don't expect me to explain this to everyone at the club. And what about Madison? You know how she feels about divorce." Now, sitting beside Ethan's hospital bed as monitors beeped around us, I realized how twisted my family's priorities were. My son was fighting for his life, and all my mother cared about was whether I would make an appearance at a birthday party to keep up appearances. Brian returned to the ICU room with 2 cups of coffee and handed one to me. "Any change?" he asked, looking at Ethan. I shook my head. His fever's still high, but the nurse said the antibiotics should start working soon. I took a sip of the coffee, grateful for the warmth and caffeine. "Thanks for staying." "Of course," Brian said, sitting in the chair on the other side of Ethan's bed. "He's my son, too." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, both watching Ethan's face for any sign of improvement. Despite our divorce, in that moment I was profoundly thankful for Brian's steady presence. He might not have been the right husband for me, but he was an excellent father who never questioned where he should be in a crisis. "Your mom texted me," Brian said after a while, breaking the silence. "She wanted to know if I could talk some sense into you about the party tomorrow." I closed my eyes, feeling a fresh wave of anger and hurt. Of course she did. "I told her that Ethan was critically ill and neither of us would be leaving the hospital," he replied. "She said I was being dramatic and enabling your attention-seeking behavior." A hollow laugh escaped me. Classic Judith Mitchell. Everything is about her, even her grandson being in the ICU. Brian reached across Ethan's bed and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to deal with her right now, Audrey. Focus on Ethan. I'll run interference with your family." As grateful as I was for the offer, I knew this was a battle I would eventually have to face myself. Years of conditioning had taught me to give in to my mother's demands to keep the peace, but as I looked at my son's pale face, I knew this time would be different. Some things were more important than keeping up appearances, and Ethan's life was at the top of that list. By Sunday morning, Ethan's condition had worsened instead of improved. The infection was spreading despite the powerful antibiotics, and his body was responding with systemic inflammation. The ICU doctor came in early to speak with us, her face serious as she examined Ethan's chart and the latest lab results. "I'm concerned about the development of sepsis," she explained. "The infection from his ruptured appendix has entered his bloodstream, and his body is mounting an overwhelming immune response." Even with my nursing background, hearing those words about my own child sent a chill through me. Sepsis was serious, potentially fatal if not treated aggressively. "We're going to adjust his antibiotic regimen and add medication to support his blood pressure," the doctor continued. "We also need to closely monitor his kidney and lung function. Sepsis can cause multiple organ systems to start failing." "Is he going to be okay?" Brian asked, voicing the question I couldn't bring myself to say aloud. The doctor's expression was compassionate but honest. "He's very sick, but he's young and was healthy before this happened. That works in his favor. The next 24 hours will be critical." After she left, I moved my chair closer to Ethan's bed and stroked his forehead gently. His skin was hot with fever, and occasionally he would stir and moan before settling back into medicated sleep. The nurses came in regularly to adjust his 4 medications, check his vital signs, and empty the drainage tubes from his abdomen. My phone had been buzzing constantly all morning. I had silenced it, but could see the notifications piling up. Most were from my mother, but there were also messages from Karen, Aunt Madison, and various extended family members. All about the party, I was sure. Around 11 in the morning, Brian convinced me to take a short break. "Go shower in the family room and change your clothes," he urged. I'll stay with Ethan and call you immediately if anything changes. I reluctantly agreed, knowing I needed to take care of myself to be strong for Ethan. The family room for ICU parents had a small bathroom with a shower. The hot water helped clear my head, and the clean clothes Brian had brought from my apartment made me feel slightly more human. When I returned to Ethan's room 20 minutes later, I was shocked to find my mother there, designer handbag on her arm, and fully dressed for what was clearly a pre-party brunch, based on her outfit. "There you are," she said as I walked in, as if I had been deliberately avoiding her. "I've been trying to reach you all morning." "I've been here with my critically ill son," I replied, my voice tight as I moved back to Ethan's bedside. "How did you get in?" "They're only allowing parents in the ICU." I told them I was his grandmother, of course, she said with a dismissive wave. Though I don't appreciate having to explain myself to the security guard. In my day, people recognized family members without requiring identification. Brian stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "I'll go get some more coffee," he said, giving my shoulder a supportive squeeze as he left the room. My mother barely acknowledged his departure. Instead, she opened her purse and pulled out her phone. I took a few pictures for Facebook. Everyone's been asking about Ethan, and I thought it would be nice to show that I'm here supporting my family. I looked up in horror to see her positioning her phone for another photo of Ethan in his hospital bed, surrounded by medical equipment, vulnerable and unconscious. "What are you doing?" I demanded, moving to block her view. "You can't take pictures of him like this." "Don't be ridiculous, Audrey," she huffed. "People want to know how he's doing." I already posted one with a lovely caption about being a devoted grandmother during this difficult time. I felt a surge of rage unlike anything I'd experienced before. "You posted pictures of my critically ill child on social media without my permission? Delete them. Now." "You're overreacting as usual," she said, but something in my expression must have convinced her I was serious. She tapped at her phone screen a few times. "There. Deleted. Though I don't see what the big deal is. The Henderson's grandson was in the hospital last month, and Carol posted updates every day." People appreciated being kept informed. "This isn't about keeping people informed," I said, struggling to keep my voice down for Ethan's sake. "This is about you using my son's illness to get attention and sympathy online while you haven't even asked me once how serious his condition is." My mother had the audacity to look offended. "Of course I know how he is. He has appendicitis. Children get sick all the time, Audrey. You're being dramatic as usual." "Dramatic?" I repeated, my voice rising despite my efforts. "He has sepsis, Mom. Do you even know what that means? He could die. His organs could start failing at any moment. The doctors aren't sure if the antibiotics are working. He's fighting for his life, and all you care about is whether I'm going to make it to Madison's birthday party." My mother's expression barely changed. "I understand you're upset, but there's no need for exaggeration. Brian will be here with him. You can come to the party for just an hour or two, and then come back. Madison specifically asked if you would be there, and I already told her you would." That was the moment I realized my mother was never going to understand, never going to be the supportive parent I needed. Her world of social obligations and appearances was more real to her than her grandson's life-threatening illness. "Get out," I said quietly. "Excuse me," she replied, clearly not believing what she'd heard. "Get out of this room. Get out of this hospital. I don't want you here." My mother's face flushed with anger. "You do not speak to me that way, Audrey Elizabeth Mitchell. I am your mother." "And I am Ethan's mother," I countered, finding strength I didn't know I had. "And right now, that's the only role that matters to me. Please leave. Now." For a moment, I thought she might argue further, but instead, she gathered her purse and stood up straight, her posture rigid with indignation. "You'll regret this behavior," she said coldly. "Madison will be very disappointed." After she left, I collapsed back into the chair by Ethan's bed, shaking with emotion. Brian returned a few minutes later, took one look at my face, and set the coffee cups down. "What happened?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. I told him about the photos, about my mother's dismissal of Ethan's condition, about her continued insistence that I attend the party. As I spoke, my phone began buzzing again. This time it was Karen calling. I reluctantly answered, putting it on speaker so Brian could hear. "Audrey, what did you say to Mom?" Karen demanded without preamble. "She's absolutely beside herself. I told her to leave after she took photos of Ethan in his ICU bed and posted them on Facebook without my permission," I replied wearily. There was a pause on the other end. "Well, I'm sure she was just trying to keep everyone updated," Karen finally said, though she sounded less certain. "Karen, do you even know how sick Ethan is?" I asked. "Mom said it was appendicitis, and that you're making a bigger deal of it than necessary," she replied. I took a deep breath. Ethan's appendix ruptured before they could remove it. He has a severe infection that has spread to his bloodstream. He's in septic shock. The doctors aren't sure if he's going to make it through the next 24 hours. Another, longer pause. "Oh my God," Karen finally said, her voice small. "Mom didn't tell us it was that serious." "Of course she didn't," I said bitterly. "Because that would be a legitimate reason for me to miss the precious birthday party, and we can't have that." The conversation with Karen was followed by a call from Aunt Madison herself. Unlike my mother and sister, Madison didn't beat around the bush. "Audrey, I understand Ethan is in the hospital, and of course, that's concerning," she began. "But I've been planning this birthday celebration for months, and your mother has been looking forward to having the whole family there. Surely you can attend for just a short while? It would mean so much to both of us." I was too emotionally drained to argue. "I'm sorry, Aunt Madison, but I won't be leaving my son's side while he's fighting for his life." "Fighting for his life seems rather melodramatic for appendicitis, doesn't it?" she replied, and I could hear the skepticism in her voice. "It's not just appendicitis anymore," I tried to explain. "There were complications." Yes, I'm sure it's very stressful," she interrupted. "But these things usually turn out fine. And this is my 60th birthday, Audrey. It's a milestone. The governor is coming, you know. And the new wing of the Children's Museum I funded will be announced. It would be noticed if my only niece isn't there." I ended the call shortly after, promising to think about it just to get her off the phone. But there was nothing to think about. I wasn't leaving Ethan, not for a birthday party, not for anything. As the day progressed, Ethan's condition continued to deteriorate. His blood pressure dropped dangerously low despite medication to support it, and his breathing became more labored. The doctors added oxygen through a nasal cannula and discussed the possibility of intubation if his respiratory status worsened further. By evening, the ICU doctor called in the pediatric surgeon for a consultation. They spoke in hushed tones at Ethan's bedside while Brian and I watched anxiously. "We're concerned that there may be additional pockets of infection that weren't fully drained during the initial surgery," the surgeon explained to us. "If his condition doesn't improve by morning, we may need to take him back to the operating room for another procedure to clear out more of the infection." The thought of Ethan undergoing another surgery in his weakened state was terrifying, but I understood the necessity. The infection had to be controlled before it could cause irreparable damage to his organs. As night fell, Brian insisted on staying again. He called the school where he taught and arranged for a substitute teacher to cover his classes for the week. We took turns sitting beside Ethan, talking to him softly even though he remained unconscious, telling him how brave he was and how much we loved him. In those quiet, desperate hours of the night, with monitors beeping and nurses coming and going, I realized something profound. Brian might not have been my perfect match as a husband, but he was exactly the father Ethan needed, steady, reliable, and present without hesitation in a crisis. The contrast between his genuine concern and my own mother's shallow response couldn't have been more stark. "I'm glad you're here," I told him during one of our shift changes around midnight. "I don't think I could handle this alone." Brian's tired smile was warm. "You could. You're stronger than you think, Audrey. But you don't have to. We're still a team when it comes to Ethan." As I watched him gently adjust Ethan's blanket, I wondered why I had never been able to set boundaries with my family the way I had managed to create a healthy co-parenting relationship with Brian after our divorce. Perhaps it was time to apply the same principles of respect and clear communication to my relationship with my mother. If Ethan pulled through this crisis, I promised myself things would be different going forward. No more giving in to maintain peace. No more allowing my mother's obsession with appearances to override what was best for my son. No more accepting emotional manipulation as normal family dynamics. First, though, Ethan had to survive the night. I know dealing with family crises can be incredibly isolating. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between family expectations and doing what's right, let me know in the comments. The night at the hospital was one of the longest of my life, and what happened the next morning would change everything. Monday morning dawned with no improvement in Ethan's condition. If anything, he seemed worse. His oxygen requirements had increased overnight, and his kidney function was showing signs of stress. The medical team had already been in twice to adjust his medications and discuss the possibility of the second surgery. I had barely slept, dozing occasionally in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed. Brian had gone to the cafeteria to get us breakfast, though neither of us had much appetite. My phone had finally stopped buzzing around midnight, giving me a brief respite from my family's demands. At precisely 9:30 in the morning, as a nurse was checking Ethan's vital signs, my mother walked into the ICU room. I blinked in disbelief at the sight of her. She was fully dressed for Madison's party in an expensive-looking pale blue dress, her hair freshly styled, makeup perfect, and pearl necklace gleaming. She looked entirely out of place among the medical equipment and sterile surroundings. "Good morning," she said briskly, as if yesterday's confrontation had never happened. "I thought I'd stop by on my way to help Madison with the final party preparations." The nurse gave me a sympathetic look as she finished recording Ethan's vital signs and quietly left the room. I stood up, placing myself between my mother and Ethan's bed. "What are you doing here?" I asked. "I thought I made myself clear yesterday." "Don't be childish, Audrey," my mother replied, setting her designer handbag on the visitor's chair. "I'm here to relieve you, so you can go home and get ready for the party. It starts at 2, but family is expected by 1:30 for photos." I stared at her, wondering if she was deliberately being obtuse or if she genuinely couldn't comprehend the severity of the situation. "Mom, I told you I'm not going to the party. Ethan is critically ill." She sighed dramatically. "Yes, he's sick. I can see that. But you sitting here staring at him isn't making him better, is it? The doctors and nurses are taking care of him. You can leave for a few hours. He might need surgery again today," I explained, trying to keep my voice calm. "The infection isn't under control." "Well, they'll hardly do surgery during Madison's party hours," my mother replied dismissively. "These things are scheduled in advance. You can come to the party and then come back afterward if they decide he needs another procedure." The casual disregard for Ethan's life-threatening condition in favor of a birthday party schedule broke something inside me. "Are you even listening to yourself?" I asked, my voice rising. "Ethan could die. Do you understand that? My son, your grandson, might not survive this infection. And you're worried about party photos?" My mother glanced around nervously, as if concerned someone might overhear. "Lower your voice, Audrey. We're in a hospital." "Yes, we are in a hospital," I replied, not lowering my voice at all. "Because Ethan is fighting for his life. Why can't you understand that this is more important than any party?" "Of course I understand he's ill," my mother said, her tone condescending. "But you're being hysterical. I spoke with Madison's friend Dr. Reynolds last night. You know, the chief of surgery at Boston Memorial, and he assured me that children with appendicitis complications almost always recover fully." "Did you tell Dr. Reynolds that Ethan has sepsis?" I demanded. "Did you mention his kidney function is declining? Or that he might need a second surgery? Or did you downplay his condition so you wouldn't have to explain why I'm not at the party?" My mother's momentary hesitation told me everything I needed to know. "I may not have gone into all the medical details," she admitted, "but the point remains that you're allowing this situation to consume you unnecessarily. Brian is perfectly capable of staying with Ethan while you fulfill your family obligations. My family obligation is to my son, I said firmly. You have obligations to the rest of your family too, she countered. I've already told everyone you'll be at the party. Madison specifically mentioned you in the seating arrangement. What am I supposed to tell people when you don't show up? Tell them the truth. Tell them my son is critically ill in the ICU. My mother's expression hardened. I will not announce that at a celebration. It would completely ruin the mood. And there it was, the admission that she had been lying to our family about how serious Ethan's condition was. The realization hit me like a physical blow. What have you been telling people? I asked quietly. She shifted uncomfortably. I simply said Ethan had a minor procedure and was recovering well. There's no need to worry everyone with dramatic details. Dramatic details? I repeated, my voice rising again. Like the fact that he might die? That's not drama. Mother, that's reality. My reality. Ethan's reality. You're making a scene, my mother hissed, glancing toward the door. This is exactly why I didn't tell people how you're behaving. You've always been so emotional, so prone to exaggeration. Something inside me snapped. Years of suppressed anger and hurt came pouring out. Get out, I said, my voice shaking. Get out of this room, get out of this hospital, and get out of my life until you can acknowledge that my son's life is more important than your social standing. My mother's face flushed with anger. How dare you speak to me that way? After everything I've done for you and Ethan, do you have any idea how much I've helped you since your divorce? Who do you think has been supplementing Ethan's private school tuition? Brian certainly can't afford it on a teacher's salary, and neither can you with your nurse's income. I never asked for your help, I retorted, though I had known she was contributing to Ethan's education. It was the one area where she had seemed genuinely concerned about his welfare. Well, you won't be getting it anymore, she threatened. If you can't do this one thing for the family, if you can't spare a few hours for Madison's milestone birthday, then you're choosing to separate yourself from this family and all the benefits that come with it. If that's how you define family, as a transaction where I have to earn your love and support by doing what you want regardless of the consequences, then yes, I am choosing to separate myself from it. Our voices had risen to the point where a nurse and a security officer appeared in the doorway. Is everything okay in here? The nurse asked cautiously. No, I said firmly. My mother was just leaving, and she is not to be allowed back into this room or anywhere near my son. The security officer stepped forward. Ma'am, I'll need to escort you out of the ICU. My mother gathered her handbag with as much dignity as she could muster. This isn't over, Audrey, she said coldly. You're making a choice right now that you will regret for the rest of your life. The only thing I would regret, I replied, is leaving my son when he needs me most, just to make you look good at a party. After she was escorted out, I collapsed back into the chair by Ethan's bed, shaking with emotion. The nurse checked Ethan's monitors and 4 lines, then looked at me sympathetically. Family can be the hardest part of medical crises, she said gently. For what it's worth, you're doing the right thing staying with your son. Brian returned a few minutes later with coffee and bagels, surprised to find me in tears. I told him about the confrontation with my mother and her ultimatum about the financial support for Ethan's school. We'll figure it out, he said without hesitation. Ethan can come to the public school where I teach. It's a good school. Or we can look for scholarships. Money isn't worth what your mother is asking of you. His immediate support without judgment meant more to me than I could express. I'm sorry she put us in this position, I said. Brian shook his head. This isn't your fault, Audrey. Your mother's priorities have always been skewed. I saw it when we were married, but I never wanted to come between you and your family. You knew? I asked, surprised. Of course I knew, he said with a sad smile. I saw how she treated you, how she manipulated you with guilt and shame. I just hoped eventually you'd see it too and set some boundaries. I wish I'd done it sooner, I admitted. You're doing it now, he pointed out. That's what matters. Around noon, the pediatric surgeon returned with the ICU doctor. After examining Ethan and reviewing his latest lab results, They confirmed what we had been dreading. The antibiotics aren't controlling the infection sufficiently, the surgeon explained. We need to take him back to the operating room to clean out more of the infected material and place additional drains. We've scheduled the procedure for 4 o'clock this afternoon. As they explained the risks and had us sign consent forms, I was acutely aware that 4 o'clock was right in the middle of Madison's birthday celebration. My mother would be furious that not only was I missing the party, but I was involved in a medical drama that directly conflicted with her sister's special day. The thought almost made me laugh hysterically. After the doctors left, Brian's parents arrived at the hospital. Unlike my mother, they came prepared to be helpful, bringing homemade food for us, comfortable pillows from home, and offers to do whatever we needed. Brian's mother, Ellen, hugged me tightly despite our divorce. "We're here for all of you," she assured me. "Ethan is our grandson no matter what, and you'll always be family to us." The contrast between their genuine concern and my own mother's behavior was painful, but illuminating. This was what family should be, people who show up when you need them, who offer support without conditions. As the afternoon wore on and the time for Ethan's surgery approached, I received a text from Karen. "FYI. Mom told everyone at the party that Ethan just has a mild infection and you're being dramatic for attention." Madison made a toast to absent family members who allow minor inconveniences to keep them from celebrating life's important moments. "Thought you should know what they're saying about you." I showed the message to Brian, who shook his head in disgust. "They're unbelievable," he said. "What hurts most," I replied, "is that they're diminishing how sick Ethan is. It's like they can't acknowledge the reality because it would interfere with their narrative." As the nurses prepared Ethan for his second surgery, I leaned down to kiss his forehead, still hot with fever. "Fight, my brave dinosaur boy," I whispered. "Mommy and Daddy are right here waiting for you." Watching them will him away for the second time was even harder than the first. Now I knew exactly how much could go wrong, how quickly a routine procedure could become life-threatening. As Brian and I walked to the surgical waiting room, I realized I was finally seeing my family clearly for the first time in my life. I had always thought my mother's obsession with appearances was annoying but ultimately harmless. Now I understood it was toxic, so toxic that she would rather pretend her grandson wasn't gravely ill than deal with the inconvenience of the truth. So toxic that she would threaten to withdraw support from her grandson's education if his mother wouldn't abandon him in a medical crisis to attend a party. As we sat in the waiting room, surrounded by Brian's supportive parents, I made a decision. Whatever happened with Ethan's surgery, my relationship with my mother and the rest of my family would never be the same again. I would no longer compromise what was truly important to maintain an illusion of family harmony. If you've ever had to take a stand against toxic family members, you know it's one of the hardest things to do. The surgery was scheduled for 2 hours, but as we waited, time seemed to stretch endlessly. What happened next would test every boundary I'd just set and reveal family secrets I never expected to uncover. Tuesday morning brought the first real sign of hope. Ethan's second surgery had been successful in removing additional pockets of infection, and his fever had dropped slightly overnight. The doctors cautioned that he wasn't out of danger yet, but it was the first positive development since he'd been admitted. I had spent the night in his ICU room, dozing in the chair between nurse visits. Brian had gone home to shower and change clothes but promised to return by morning. His parents had insisted on bringing breakfast for both of us, and their quiet, practical support continued to be a lifeline. Around 10 in the morning, as I was gently washing Ethan's face with a cool cloth, Karen appeared in the doorway of the ICU room. I was surprised to see her, especially since she was still dressed in what appeared to be yesterday's clothes, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. "Can I come in?" she asked hesitantly. I nodded, too exhausted for another confrontation. Karen approached Ethan's bed slowly, her eyes widening as she took in all the medical equipment surrounding him. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He looks so small." "He's doing a little better this morning," I said. "His fever is down slightly." Karen pulled the second visitor chair closer to the bed. "Audrey, I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was this sick." "What did you think was happening?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. She looked down at her hands. Mom kept saying it was just appendicitis, that you were being dramatic and using Ethan's minor illness as an excuse to avoid Madison's party because you've always been jealous of her. The accusation was so absurd, I actually laughed. Jealous? Of Madison? Why would I be jealous of a 60-year-old woman I barely know? Karen shrugged uncomfortably. Mom said you've always resented Madison's success and wealth, and that you deliberately chose to miss the party to hurt both of them. And you believed that? I asked incredulously. You thought I would use my son's illness as some petty revenge tactic? I didn't know what to think, Karen admitted. But after the party, when you still weren't answering calls or texts, I started to worry that maybe it really was serious. I drove here straight from Madison's house last night, but they wouldn't let me in after visiting hours. I studied my sister's face, trying to determine if her concern was genuine. Karen and I had never been close, especially after I diverged from the family's expectations. She had always been firmly in my mother's camp, echoing her criticisms and priorities. Why are you really here, Karen? I asked directly. She looked up, her eyes unexpectedly filling with tears. Because I realized at the party that something was very wrong, and not just with Ethan. What do you mean? The way Mom and Madison were talking about you, about Ethan, it was cruel. They were making jokes about you being overly attached to your son. Madison said something about how you always had a flair for drama, and how convenient it was that Ethan got sick right before her party. I felt a fresh wave of anger at the callousness. And that didn't bother you before now? It did, Karen said quietly. But I told myself they were just upset about the party. It wasn't until I overheard Mom talking to Madison's friend Dr. Reynolds that I realized she was deliberately downplaying how sick Ethan is. When he suggested she might want to visit her grandson in the hospital, she said, and I quote, "Oh, it's nothing serious. Audrey always exaggerates medical issues. Remember when she thought she had Lyme disease?" I winced at the memory. Years ago, I had indeed been diagnosed with Lyme disease after months of unexplained symptoms. My mother had been convinced I was making it up for attention until the positive test results came back. That's when I knew I had to see for myself, Karen continued. I couldn't be part of the lie anymore. As she spoke, Brian arrived with his parents, all three carrying coffee cups and bags of food. They paused in the doorway, clearly surprised to see Karen. We can come back, Brian's mother offered, but I shook my head. It's okay. This is my sister Karen. Brief introductions were made, and Brian's parents tactfully offered to wait in the family room while we talked. Brian stayed, taking his usual position on the other side of Ethan's bed. How was the party? I asked Karen, not really caring but curious about what I had missed. Karen's expression darkened. It was elaborate as expected. Governor was there, lots of important people. Madison announced the new Children's Museum wing named after her. There was a string quartet, champagne fountain, the works. Sounds like Madison got exactly what she wanted, I commented. Almost, Karen replied. She was furious that you weren't there. Apparently, there was supposed to be some big family announcement. Brian and I exchanged glances. What kind of announcement? He asked. Karen shrugged. Something about the family trust fund. Madison has been managing it since Dad left, and I think she was planning to announce how it would be distributed. Suddenly, my mother's desperate insistence that I attend the party made a bit more sense. It wasn't just about appearances, it was about money. If Madison was making decisions about the family trust, my mother would want to ensure I didn't do anything to jeopardize my potential inheritance. I don't care about the trust fund, I said firmly. I never have. I know, Karen said, surprising me. That's one of the things I've always envied about you, Audrey. You've never been controlled by the family money the way the rest of us have. Before I could respond to this unexpected admission, there was a commotion in the hallway, and Madison herself appeared in the doorway, holding a small bakery box. Well, she said, taking in the scene before her. I see Karen found you. I stiffened, preparing for another confrontation, but Madison's demeanor was different from my mother's, less openly hostile, more calculating. She approached the bed and looked down at Ethan with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I brought cake," she said, holding up the box. "For my birthday. I thought perhaps Ethan might like some when he wakes up." The gesture was so incongruous with the situation that I didn't know how to respond. Ethan was on 4 nutrition and wouldn't be eating cake anytime soon, but I doubted Madison had much experience with critically ill children. "That's thoughtful," I managed. "But he won't be able to eat solid food for a while." Madison nodded briskly and set the box aside. "Well, it will be here when he can." She turned to Karen. "Your mother is looking for you. She's quite upset that you disappeared from the after-party." "I'm sure she is," Karen replied, with uncharacteristic defiance in her voice. "But I needed to see my nephew." Madison studied Karen with narrowed eyes before turning back to me. "Your absence was noticed yesterday, Audrey. Several people asked where you were." "I hope you told them the truth," I said. "That my son was fighting for his life." A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed Madison's face. I said there was a family medical issue. I didn't think details were appropriate for a celebration. Brian made a sound of disgust but didn't speak. Madison glanced at him briefly before returning her attention to me. "I've known your mother all her life, Audrey. I know her faults better than anyone. She can be shallow, status-obsessed, and sometimes cruel in her pursuit of what she thinks matters. But she's also my sister, and I've enabled her worst qualities for years." This frank assessment caught me off guard. I had expected Madison to defend my mother, not acknowledge her flaws. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Madison sighed and sank into the chair Karen had vacated. "Because what happened yesterday made me realize how toxic our family dynamics have become, and I bear much of the responsibility for that." Karen looked as shocked as I felt. Madison had always been the family matriarch, aloof and judgmental, never one to admit fault or show vulnerability. "Your mother has been lying to everyone about Ethan's condition," Madison continued. When Karen left the party abruptly, I suspected something wasn't right. "I called my friend Dr. Reynolds this morning to ask about pediatric sepsis, and he explained how serious it is. I owe you an apology for not taking this situation seriously." The apology, while unexpected, felt hollow given the circumstances. "You and my mother made cruel jokes about me at your party," I said. Karen told me. Madison didn't deny it. "Yes, we did. It was unkind and unfair. But there's something you should know about your mother, something I've never told anyone in the family." She glanced at Brian, clearly hesitant to speak in front of him. "It's okay," I said. "Brian can hear whatever you have to say." Madison nodded and continued. "Your mother has always been obsessed with appearances and social standing because she grew up with nothing. Our parents weren't wealthy Connecticut socialites like she's led everyone to believe. They were working-class people from New Hampshire. Your grandfather was a janitor, and your grandmother cleaned houses." This revelation stunned me into silence. My mother had always talked about her privileged upbringing, about summers in Newport and private school education. "When I started my investment firm and became successful," Madison went on, "Judith latched onto my success as a way to reinvent herself. She created an entirely fictional background and has been living that lie for over 40 years. That's why she's so obsessed with what people think," Karen said slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. "She's terrified of being exposed as a fraud." Madison nodded. "It doesn't excuse her behavior, but it might help you understand it. Your father discovered the truth shortly before he left her. She's been financially dependent on me ever since, which has only reinforced her fear of losing status." My mind was reeling from these revelations. My entire understanding of my family history had been built on lies. "Did Dad leave because of the lies?" I asked. "Partly," Madison admitted, "but also because she had been using family money from the trust, to maintain her facade without his knowledge. When he found out, he was furious. The woman he thought he had married didn't exist." The irony wasn't lost on me. My mother, who had criticized me for my divorce, had driven her own husband away with her deceptions. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked Madison. Because I watched my sister choose a birthday party over her grandson's health, and it made me realize how complicit I've been in allowing her delusions to hurt the people around her, especially you and Ethan. Madison's expression was somber. I've enabled her behavior because it was easier than confronting it, and because, in some ways, I enjoyed the power it gave me over her. This admission of manipulation was perhaps the most honest thing I'd ever heard from Madison. For all her faults, at least she was capable of self-reflection, which was more than I could say for my mother. As we were digesting this family revelation, Brian's parents returned with more coffee and enough food to feed everyone. To my surprise, Madison accepted their hospitality graciously, and for a brief time, the ICU room was filled with the mundane sounds of people sharing a meal, the rustle of paper bags, the clink of coffee cups, murmured thank yous. Throughout it all, Ethan remained stable, his vital signs slowly improving. The nurse who came to check on him commented that his color looked better, and his latest lab results showed the infection was finally responding to treatment. As the day progressed, the dynamic between Karen, Madison, and me shifted subtly. The revelations about our family history had created a new understanding, if not quite forgiveness. Brian's parents provided a model of what supportive family could look like, bringing not just food but genuine concern and practical help. By evening, when the doctor came to give us an update, I was surrounded by an unlikely support system. My sister, who had always sided with my mother, my aunt who had enabled my mother's worst behaviors, my ex-husband, and his parents. Ethan is turning a corner, the doctor announced with cautious optimism. His kidney function is improving, his white blood cell count is trending down, and his fever has continued to decrease. If this progress continues overnight, we might be able to move him out of the ICU tomorrow. The relief in the room was palpable. Brian's mother began to cry quietly, and his father put his arm around her shoulders. Karen squeezed my hand, and even Madison looked genuinely pleased by the news. As visiting hours ended, and everyone except me prepared to leave, Madison took me aside. The announcement at my party was going to be about the family trust, she confirmed. I was planning to distribute it equally between you and Karen, with provisions for Ethan's education. I don't care about the money, I reiterated. I know, Madison replied. Which is precisely why you should have it. Your mother will be furious, but it's my trust to manage, and I've made my decision. Use it to take care of Ethan and yourself. Consider it a small reparation for years of family dysfunction. As she left, I found myself in the strange position of feeling grateful to Madison while still being angry about her role in the family dynamics that had caused so much pain. People I was learning could be both toxic and caring, manipulative and honest, depending on the circumstances. The most important thing was that Ethan was improving, and I had stood my ground when it mattered most. Whatever happened with my family going forward, I knew I had made the right choice, and that knowledge gave me a strength I had never felt before. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to choose between your child's needs and family expectations? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. As night fell at the hospital, I finally allowed myself to believe Ethan might recover, but the biggest confrontation with my mother was still to come. By the following Monday, a full week after Ethan's initial surgery, he was well enough to be moved out of the ICU to a regular pediatric room. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about his recovery, though they warned it would be a long process. The infection had taken a significant toll on his body, and he would need time to regain his strength. I had been staying at the hospital continuously, sleeping in the uncomfortable chair beside Ethan's bed. Brian had been there every day, but went home at nights to sleep and shower. His parents had been bringing fresh clothes for me and taking my laundry home to wash. It was a system that worked, allowing me to focus entirely on Ethan. During this time, I had maintained minimal contact with my mother. She had sent a few text messages asking about Ethan's condition, but they always included some reference to how dramatic the situation had been or how I had ruined Madison's special day. I responded with brief, factual updates about Ethan and nothing more. On the day Ethan was moved out of the ICU, I was scrolling through my phone while he napped, catching up on emails and messages I had ignored during the crisis. A Facebook notification caught my eye. Someone had tagged me in photos from Madison's birthday party. Curious despite myself, I opened the app. What I saw made my blood boil. There, in full color, were multiple photos of my mother at Madison's party, champagne glass in hand, laughing and dancing. In one particularly infuriating image, she was cutting the cake with Madison, both of them beaming at the camera. The timestamp showed it was taken at almost the exact time Ethan had been undergoing his second emergency surgery. As I scrolled through the album, I found more evidence of my mother's callous disregard. In a video clip, she was giving a toast, saying, "Nothing is more important than being here to celebrate Madison's milestone birthday. Family always comes first." The irony was sickening. I set my phone down, hands shaking with anger. All the progress I thought I'd made in accepting my mother's limitations seemed to evaporate in the face of such blatant hypocrisy. She hadn't just prioritized a party over her grandson's life. She had actively celebrated while he fought to survive. Brian arrived a short while later, bringing lunch from a nearby deli. He found me still fuming over the photos. "I saw those yesterday," he admitted when I showed him. "I didn't want to upset you while Ethan was still critical." "She was dancing and giving toasts while our son was having emergency surgery," I said, my voice tight with controlled rage. "How can anyone be that heartless?" Brian sat beside me, his expression serious. "I've been talking to my friend Mark." "You remember, the therapist?" I described the situation without names, and he said it sounds like your mother might have narcissistic personality traits. People like that are physically incapable of seeing beyond their own needs and image. "That doesn't make it okay," I said. "No, it doesn't," Brian agreed. "But it might help explain why trying to reason with her has never worked. She's operating from a completely different reality, where she's always the center of the story." This perspective made a certain sense, especially in light of Madison's revelations about my mother's fabricated background. Her entire identity was built on appearances and status. Perhaps she literally couldn't comprehend that Ethan's life was more important than maintaining her social facade. Understanding, however, didn't equal forgiveness. As Ethan began to improve, becoming more alert and even talking a little, I made a decision. I could not allow my mother's toxic behavior to continue affecting our lives. Setting boundaries wasn't enough. I needed to be honest about what had happened, both for my own healing and to protect Ethan from future harm. That evening, after Brian had gone home and Ethan was sleeping comfortably, I wrote a lengthy post on social media. I wasn't usually one to air family drama publicly, but I felt it was necessary to counter the fictional narrative my mother had been spreading. I described Ethan's medical crisis in detail, including the timeline of his hospitalizations and surgeries. I explained how my mother had pressured me to leave him for a birthday party and had lied to family members about the severity of his condition. I included screenshots of text messages she had sent and photos of Ethan in the hospital, with his face blurred for privacy. And I contrasted them with the photos of her celebrating at the party during his most critical hours. "I'm sharing this not to vilify my mother," I wrote in conclusion, "but to reclaim my truth. For too long, I've allowed my family's narrative to override reality. My son almost died while my mother was dancing at a party. Those are facts, not drama or exaggeration. Going forward, I will protect my son and myself from anyone, family or not, who cannot respect our well-being." I hesitated before hitting post, knowing it would cause a firestorm. But then I looked at Ethan, peacefully sleeping after the ordeal he'd been through, and found my resolve. The truth needed to be told. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends, colleagues, and even acquaintances expressed shock and support. Many shared their own stories of family toxicity and the difficult boundaries they had been forced to set. The hospital staff who had witnessed my mother's behavior firsthand commented with messages of encouragement. Unsurprisingly, my mother was furious. She called repeatedly until I blocked her number. She sent emails accusing me of humiliating her publicly and threatening legal action for defamation. I saved every message, but didn't respond. The truth was my defense, and I had plenty of evidence to back it up. What did surprise me was the response from our broader community. Several of my mother's friends from the country club reached out privately to express their support for me. One woman wrote, "I've known your mother for 20 years, and while I consider her friend, I've always seen how she treats you. You did the right thing staying with your son. Any mother would have done the same." Another unexpected ally emerged in one of Ethan's school teachers, who came to visit him in the hospital. "Your mother told the school Ethan had a mild case of appendicitis and would be back in a few days," she informed me. When he didn't return, I called the hospital directly and was told he was in the ICU. That's when I realized something wasn't right. This teacher had apparently confronted my mother at a school function, questioning the discrepancy. My mother had dismissed her concerns and suggested she was overstepping her boundaries. Now, the teacher brought Ethan cards from his classmates and offered to arrange home tutoring during his recovery. As Ethan's physical condition improved day by day, I found my own emotional health strengthening as well. Years of conditioned responses to my mother's manipulation began to unravel as I saw her behavior through the clear lens of the crisis. Brian was an unexpected source of insight during this time. "I should have said something when we were married," he admitted during one of our conversations while Ethan napped. "I saw how she treated you, how she undermined your confidence and made you question your own perceptions. But I didn't want to come between you and your family. It wouldn't have made a difference," I told him. I wasn't ready to see it then. "What changed?" he asked. I looked at Ethan, his color improving but still attached to IVs and monitors. "She finally asked me to choose between her and someone I love more than life itself. There was no contest." 2 weeks after his initial admission, Ethan was finally cleared to go home. He would need follow-up appointments and was still on oral antibiotics, but the immediate danger had passed. As we prepared for discharge, Brian and his parents helped gather all the cards, stuffed animals, and other items that had accumulated in the hospital room. It was during these preparations that my mother made her final attempt to reassert control. She arrived unannounced, accompanied by a woman I recognized as a photographer who often covered society events for the local newspaper. "I thought it would be nice to document Ethan's homecoming," my mother announced, as if the past 2 weeks of conflict had never happened. "Marjorie has agreed to take some photos for a human interest piece in the Westport Gazette." I stared at her in disbelief. After everything that had happened, she was still trying to control the narrative, to turn Ethan's medical crisis into a photo opportunity that would cast her in a favorable light. "No," I said firmly. "Absolutely not." "Don't be difficult, Audrey," my mother replied, her smile fixed but her eyes cold. "This is a chance to share a positive story after all that unpleasantness online. People are saying terrible things about me because of your post." "People are saying true things about you because of my post," I corrected. "And I will not allow you to use Ethan's recovery as a publicity stunt to rehabilitate your image." The photographer, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself and left. My mother's facade cracked as soon as she was gone. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what I've been through because of your little tantrum online? I've had to resign from 2 committee positions. People I've known for years are suddenly too busy to have lunch. Madison had to call in favors just to prevent the club from reviewing my membership." "What you've been through," I repeated incredulously. "My son almost died. He had 2 emergency surgeries and spent a week in the ICU. He lost 15 pounds from his already small frame. He'll have scars for life. And you're worried about lunch dates?" Brian and his parents had tactfully stepped out of the room when my mother arrived, but Ethan was awake and listening to our exchange with wide eyes. "Grandma, why didn't you visit me when I was really sick?" he asked suddenly, his voice small but clear. My mother turned to him with a practiced smile. "Of course I visited you, sweetheart. You were just too sick to remember." The casual lie, told directly to Ethan's face, was the final straw. "That's enough," I said, stepping between them. "I want you to leave, and I don't want you to contact us again until you can acknowledge what really happened and apologize sincerely." "You're overreacting as usual," my mother snapped. "And you're turning Ethan against me, which is unforgivable." "I'm protecting him from your lies," I countered. "He deserves better." My mother's expression hardened. "If this is how you want to play it, fine. But Remember that I control your trust fund inheritance. Keep pushing, and you'll find yourself completely cut off. I laughed, genuinely amused by her outdated threat. Madison already told me she's restructuring the trust. But even if she weren't, do you really think I'd choose money over my integrity or my son's well-being? You've never understood what actually matters, Mom. That's the real tragedy here. When she realized her financial leverage was gone, my mother resorted to creating a scene, raising her voice and making accusations until hospital security had to be called. As they escorted her from the building, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The mother I had always hoped for, the one who would love me unconditionally and support me when it mattered most, had never really existed. That evening, as we finally brought Ethan home to his own bed surrounded by his dinosaur collection, I realized that our family had been permanently reconfigured by the crisis. Brian and his parents had proven themselves to be Ethan's true family, showing up consistently when it mattered most. Karen had begun to question the toxic dynamics she had previously enabled. Madison, for all her flaws, had at least been capable of recognizing the harm that had been done. And I had found a strength I never knew I possessed, the strength to stand firm in my truth, to protect my child at all costs, and to create boundaries that would shield us from toxic influences, even when those influences came from my own mother. As I tucked Ethan into his bed at home for the first time in 2 weeks, he looked up at me with serious eyes. "Mom, is Grandma a bad person?" he asked. I considered my answer carefully. "No, honey, she's not a bad person. But she has some problems that make it hard for her to think about other people's feelings. Sometimes people who are hurting inside end up hurting the people around them without meaning to. Like when I had a splinter and kicked the doctor who was trying to take it out," he asked, referencing an incident from when he was 4. I smiled at his simple but accurate analogy. "Something like that. Grandma has a kind of splinter in her heart that makes her act in ways that aren't kind or honest. And until she lets someone help her remove that splinter, we need to be careful around her." He nodded solemnly. "Can we still love her even if we need to be careful?" His question brought tears to my eyes. Even after everything, Ethan's capacity for compassion humbled me. "Yes, dinosaur boy. We can still love her from a safe distance." As he drifted off to sleep, I reflected on the journey we had been through. The medical crisis had nearly taken my son from me, but it had also freed me from patterns of family dysfunction that had controlled my life for decades. In fighting for Ethan's life, I had somehow found my own voice and the courage to use it. 6 months after Ethan's life-threatening illness, our world had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Ethan had made a full physical recovery, his resilience amazing everyone, including his doctors. Though he had scars on his abdomen from the surgeries and drainage tubes, he proudly called them his dinosaur battle marks and had returned to his energetic, curious self. The changes in our family dynamics, however, were even more profound than Ethan's physical recovery. True to my word, I had maintained strict boundaries with my mother. We had limited contact, always on my terms, and always with clear expectations about her behavior. If she began criticizing or manipulating, I would end the conversation immediately. It wasn't perfect, but it was a system that protected both Ethan and me from the worst of her toxic influence. My relationship with Karen had evolved in unexpected ways. After witnessing my mother's behavior during Ethan's illness, Karen had begun her own journey of recognizing the dysfunction in our family. She started therapy and gradually distanced herself from our mother's control. We weren't best friends, but we had developed a mutual respect and understanding that had never existed before. "I always thought you were weak for not playing by Mom's rules," Karen admitted during one of our coffee meetups. "Now I realize you were the strong one all along." Madison had followed through on her promise to restructure the family trust. Despite my mother's furious objections, Madison had placed half the money in a trust for Ethan's education and future, with the remainder split between Karen and me. It wasn't about the money itself. I had never based my life decisions on financial gain, but the symbolic gesture of Madison recognizing the harm that had been done and trying, in her own way, to make amends. The most unexpected development came from a distant cousin of my father's. After reading my social media post about Ethan's illness and my mother's response, Uncle Walter had reached out to reconnect. He had been estranged from the family for years, primarily due to my mother's dismissal of him as not our social equal because of his career as a carpenter. Walter turned out to be a kind, down-to-earth man with no patience for pretense. When he learned about Ethan's interest in dinosaurs, he crafted a magnificent wooden dinosaur bookshelf for his bedroom. More significantly, when Walter's wife passed away 3 months after we reconnected, he updated his will to include Ethan and me. The small inheritance he left provided enough financial security that I never had to worry about my mother's financial threats again. My mother's social standing had been significantly affected by the truth coming out. Many of her friends, while polite to her face, had privately reached out to me to express their support. It turned out that my mother's behavior had been noticed by others over the years, but no one had felt empowered to say anything. My public stand had broken a silence that had protected toxic behavior for decades. At Ethan's school, several parents approached me to share similar stories of family pressure and difficult boundaries. Almost accidentally, I found myself starting an informal support group for people dealing with toxic family relationships. We met monthly at a local coffee shop, sharing strategies and offering each other the validation that our families had never provided. Brian and I had developed a co-parenting relationship stronger than our marriage had ever been. Without the pressure of trying to make a romantic relationship work, we found we were excellent partners in raising Ethan. He had been my rock during the hospital crisis, and that foundation of trust had only strengthened in the months since. But the most significant change was within myself. I no longer second-guessed my decisions or sought approval from people who couldn't or wouldn't give it. I had stood my ground when it mattered most, and that experience had given me a confidence I had never possessed before. The final confrontation with my mother came, predictably, around Ethan's 8th birthday. Unlike Madison's elaborate party, we planned a small celebration at a local dinosaur museum with just a few of Ethan's close friends and the people who had supported us through his illness, Brian and his parents, Karen, Madison, who had continued to make efforts to change, and Uncle Walter. My mother was not invited, a decision I made with clarity and without guilt. She had shown through her actions that she couldn't be trusted to put Ethan's well-being first, and I wasn't willing to risk her turning his special day into another opportunity for manipulation or drama. Of course, she didn't accept the boundary gracefully. 2 days before the party, a large package arrived at our apartment. Inside was an extravagant dinosaur-themed video game system that must have cost thousands of dollars. The card read, "To my precious grandson on his special day. Grandma loves you more than anyone. Hope to see you very soon for a special day, just the two of us." The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost laughable. The excessive gift, the claim of loving him more than anyone, the attempt to arrange alone time with him, all of it designed to override my boundaries and reinsert herself into our lives on her terms. After careful consideration, I packaged up the gift and returned it with a note of my own. "Thank you for thinking of Ethan, but we cannot accept gifts with strings attached. I'm teaching him that love isn't measured by the price tag of a gift or used as a tool to get what you want. If you're genuinely interested in being part of his life, we can discuss appropriate boundaries for rebuilding a relationship." She never responded to the note directly, but Karen told me she had gone into a rage when she received the returned gift, declaring me ungrateful and cruel for depriving Ethan of her generosity. What she still couldn't understand was that true generosity came without conditions or expectations of repayment. Ethan's birthday party was everything his little dinosaur-loving heart could have wanted. The museum let him hold actual fossils. He got to dig for bones in a simulated excavation site, and he was surrounded by people who truly cared about him, not their own image or agenda. The joy on his face was all the validation I needed that I had made the right choice. As the party wound down and we gathered our things to leave, Ethan turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom, I'm glad Grandma wasn't here today," he said quietly. "Why is that, buddy?" I asked, a little surprised by his directness. "Because when she's around, everyone's face gets tight like this. He demonstrated by pulling his features into a tense grimace. And nobody laughs for real. Today everybody had happy eyes. From the mouths of babes, as they say. Ethan had articulated something I had felt for years, but had never been able to name. The subtle tension that my mother's presence created. The way authentic joy was suppressed in favor of performance and appearance. That night, after tucking an exhausted but happy Ethan into bed, I sat on my balcony looking at the stars and reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. The crisis that had nearly taken my son had also given me an unexpected gift, the clarity to see my family dynamics for what they truly were and the courage to create something healthier for my son and myself. I thought about the family I was born into versus the family I had created. The first had been built on appearances, status, and conditional love. The second was founded on authenticity, mutual respect, and showing up for each other when it mattered most. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. My phone buzzed with a text from Brian. "Great party today." Ethan was so happy. "You've done an amazing job standing up for him and yourself these past months. Proud of you." His simple affirmation brought tears to my eyes. For so long, I had sought validation from people incapable of giving it, while overlooking the genuine support that had been there all along. My mother might never understand why I had drawn such firm boundaries. She might never acknowledge the harm she had caused or take responsibility for her actions during Ethan's illness. And I had finally accepted that her limitations weren't my burden to carry. What mattered was that when faced with the ultimate choice between appearances and authenticity, between toxic family expectations and my child's well-being, I had chosen what was truly important. In doing so, I had not only protected Ethan but had also broken a generational cycle of emotional manipulation that might otherwise have continued through him. Nearly losing Ethan had been the most terrifying experience of my life. But in fighting for him, I had found my voice, my strength, and a clarity about what family should truly mean. It wasn't about sharing DNA or maintaining an image. It was about who showed up when you needed them most, who loved you without conditions, and who helped you become your best self rather than a reflection of their expectations. That was the lesson I would pass on to Ethan, one far more valuable than any social connection or inheritance could ever be. I know many of you have faced similar battles with toxic family members or had to make impossible choices to protect someone you love. If my story resonated with you, please share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family? How did you find the strength to stand your ground? If you found value in my journey, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to hear more stories about family dynamics, healing, and finding your voice. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to choose their child's well-being over family expectations. Thank you for being part of my healing journey. Sometimes the family we create is more powerful than the family we're born into. Remember that you deserve to be surrounded by people who respect your boundaries and love you without conditions. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.